today, we're doing a deep dive into the 2022 historical romance film Persuasion.
Directed by Carrie Cracknell.
Right, which adapts Jane Austen's final completed novel. And, we are moving entirely past the aesthetic trappings today.
Yeah, we're not talking about the period-accurate costumes or the estates or the ballroom etiquette.
No, we're looking at this narrative as a rigorous, incredibly modern dissection of the anatomy of regret.
Which is so relatable.
Exactly. It's about the crushing psychological weight of outsourced decision-making and the totally agonizing process of reclaiming your own internal compass.
And to fully grasp the tension of that present tense collision, we really have to isolate the mechanics of the original fracture first.
We have to go back in time.
Right. So 8 years prior to the main events of this story, our protagonist, Anne Elliot, makes a decision that basically derails her own life.
But framing it simply as just a decision is doing a massive disservice to the reality of her environment.
Oh, 100%. Because if we look at Anne's baseline personality, she processes the world internally, right?
She does. She's quiet.
She is observant, highly analytical, and she's doing this in an era, early 19th century England, that exclusively rewarded the superficial, the bold, and the socially performative.
It is a severe environmental mismatch, like a total clash.
Yeah, she doesn't fit in at all.
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
The Elliot family functions as this fascinating case study in what we would now basically classify as collective narcissism.
Oh, that's a great term for them, collective narcissism.
Right. Because her father and her older sister, they operate purely on transactional metrics.
Every interaction is a calculation.
Exactly. Every single social tie is calculated to optimize their societal standing. They do not value empathy or intellectual depth.
Because you can't buy land with empathy.
Exactly. Those traits do not purchase land, and they definitely don't secure titles. Consequently, Anne is treated as this non-entity. She is effectively rendered invisible within her own home.
Well, I actually want to push back on that idea just a little bit, on her simply being invisible, I mean.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is it that she's invisible, or is it that she is actively suppressed?
I see what you're saying.
Because if you are the only emotionally intelligent person in a household full of these, transactional status obsessives, your empathy isn't just ignored.
It's viewed as a liability.
Right. They likely see her depth as a weakness, something that actively threatens their really shallow climb up the social ladder.
That is a really crucial distinction. You're right, it is active suppression.
Yeah.
When your immediate environment constantly signals that your core values are not just useless, but actively detrimental to the family's goals, it causes profound psychological erosion.
It really wears you down.
It does. Over time, that dynamic completely chips away at a person's self-trust.
Yeah.
If the people who are, biologically and socially mandated to protect you,
Your family,
if they constantly insist that your judgment is flawed, you begin to believe them. You internalize all of that invalidation.
Which brings us to the introduction of Frederick Wentworth, and really the absolute catastrophic failure of that eroded self-trust.
The heartbreak.
The major heartbreak. So 8 years ago, Anne and Wentworth formed this very genuine, really intense romantic connection.
But let's look at the systemic reality of why this was deemed completely unacceptable by her family.
It wasn't just that Wentworth was a bit, rough around the edges or lacked a fancy title.
No, it was a matter of brutal economics and severe social stratification. We're talking 1814 here. Wentworth was a young naval officer, he didn't have inherited wealth, and he had zero significant social influence.
He was a nobody to them.
To the Elliot family, he represented a total dead end. But to understand the true weight of the pressure placed on Anne, we have to look at the legal and financial frameworks of the time.
Specifically, the concept of entailment.
Right, exactly. Anne, as a woman, could not inherit her family's estate. Full stop.
That's just how the law worked.
Yep. Her future financial survival, her literal avoidance of destitution, honestly relied entirely on making a financially advantageous marriage.
So when the title of the story is Persuasion, we aren't talking about a casual conversation over tea where someone just said, hey, are you sure he's the right guy?
Oh, not at all.
The quote-unquote trusted advisors in Anne's life, her family, her maternal figures, they completely weaponized her precarious socioeconomic position.
They absolutely did.
They didn't just tell her Wentworth was a bad match. They framed the marriage as an act of familial betrayal and personal ruin.
They leveraged her eroded self-confidence against her. And this is the truly insidious nature of coerced decisions, right?
Because it's framed as love.
Exactly. The authority figures in her life, likely masked all their snobbery as profound concern for her well-being.
We're just looking out for you, Anne.
Right. They convinced her that her intuition was totally naive and that their cynical, highly transactional view of the world was the only safe reality.
So Anne didn't fall out of love.
No.
She didn't uncover some terrible character flaw in Wentworth.
She yielded to overwhelming systemic pressure because she'd been conditioned for years to doubt her own mind.
She basically outsourced her intuition to people who viewed her purely as a piece of social capital.
Which is tragic.
It's incredibly tragic. But let's look at the fallout of that outsourced decision. You know, you can force someone to break an engagement, but you cannot legislate their internal emotional state.
You can't make them stop loving someone.
You really can't. So for the next 8 years, Anne lives in this hollowed-out state of lingering regret. And I think there's a really specific psychological mechanism at play here.
Let's get into it.
Because when a relationship ends naturally, say two people just realize they're totally incompatible, the brain can actually process the closure.
You grieve, you heal, and you move on.
Right. But when a profound connection is artificially severed by external forces, while the internal feelings are still peaking, it creates this massive neurological loop.
Oh, absolutely. You are describing the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
It is the psychological principle that states people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks far better than completed ones.
And a forcefully severed relationship is basically the ultimate uncompleted task.
Exactly. The brain literally cannot file it away as finished.
It's an open
A
tab.
permanently open tab. So the what if becomes an intrusive thought. It's a ghost that Anne has lived with for nearly a decade.
Just haunting her.
Yeah, she's surrounded by all the superficiality of her family, and she's fully aware that she sacrificed the only genuine connection she ever had.
And based on advice that she knew, deep down, was flawed.
Which just makes the regret so much sharper.
Right. And that ghost finally becomes flesh and blood when Wentworth reappears.
Oh boy.
Does he ever?
But he doesn't just wander back into town like down on his luck. The circumstances of his return are practically scientifically designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on the people who drove him away.
It is the ultimate revenge glow-up.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because he is now Captain Wentworth. He's highly successful, exceptionally wealthy, and universally respected.
And the irony here is just structural to the entire narrative. Wentworth has completely bypassed the traditional aristocratic structures that the Elliot family worships.
He didn't inherit a dime.
He didn't inherit a single dime. He earned his wealth through the 19th century naval prize money system.
Which is so interesting. It is. During the Napoleonic Wars, naval officers who actually captured enemy vessels were awarded a portion of the ship's value. It was honestly one of the only true meritocracies available in that era.
You actually had to do the work.
You had to do the work. Through sheer physical courage, tactical brilliance, and immense personal risk, Wentworth has vaulted himself into the upper echelons of society.
So his very existence as a wealthy captain just completely dismantles the core argument that justified Anne's terrible advice in the first place.
It shatters it.
The, quote, trusted advisors told her he would never amount to anything, right? That betting on him was a guaranteed path to ruin.
And now he stands right in front of them as the living, breathing embodiment of their catastrophic misjudgment.
The vindication for him must be absolutely intoxicating.
Oh, no question.
But the realization for Anne, I mean, it's devastating. She didn't just lose him, she lost him for absolutely nothing.
For nothing at all. But, we must examine the psychological state of Wentworth himself here.
Let's do it.
Because the wealth and the medals, they provide a very formidable exterior. But beneath that, the fundamental injury from 8 years ago remains totally untreated.
It's still an open wound.
Exactly. When Anne broke the engagement, she didn't just end a romance. In Wentworth's eyes, she validated every single insecurity he had about his own worth.
Oh, wow.
She essentially told him, "You do not rank high enough for me to bet my life on."
Uh-huh.
That is a profound humiliation.
Which perfectly explains his demeanor when they are finally forced into the same room again.
It's so tense.
It is. He utilizes what I can really only describe as a Faraday cage of politeness.
I love that analogy. Explain that for the listener.
So a Faraday cage in physics is basically an enclosure that blocks electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
On the outside, Wentworth is highly conductive, right?
Mm-hmm.
He makes all the right social noises, he bows, he engages in the basic pleasantries.
He's perfectly polite.
He's perfectly polite, but that rigid, perfect politeness completely blocks out any emotional signal from reaching his interior. Or escaping from it, for that matter.
Right.
The, customer service voice he uses with her isn't just awkwardness. It is an absolutely impenetrable barrier.
That is an incredibly precise analogy, because the polite coldness serves a dual purpose for him. Primarily, it's an active defense mechanism. By stripping all warmth from his interactions with Anne, he guarantees she cannot access his vulnerability again.
He's locking her out.
Totally. He is actively revoking her privileges to his inner life. But secondly, we really cannot ignore the punitive aspect of this behavior.
Right. It is a massive exertion of power.
It really is.
Because 8 years ago, she held the executioner's axe. She held all the social capital, and she used it to discard him.
And now the power dynamic has entirely inverted.
Completely flipped. He is the celebrated arrival, and she is the isolated, unmarried daughter of a declining estate.
So by forcing her to interact with this impenetrable, freezing version of himself, he's subconsciously punishing her for the pain she caused.
Every formal "Good morning, Miss Elliot" is just loaded with the subtext of her betrayal.
It creates an agonizingly tense environment, because both parties are hyper-aware of this silent conversation happening right beneath the polite dialogue.
It's totally unsustainable.
It is an unsustainable emotional state. And the friction only escalates when the broader social circle begins to interact with this newly eligible Captain Wentworth.
Right, because we transition from the private agony of regret to the very public, humiliating agony of the sidelines.
Because Wentworth is now the ultimate prize in their insular society.
He's wealthy, he's unattached, and he has that allure of a war hero.
He's the Bachelor of the Year.
Exactly. Naturally, all the younger, eligible women in their social orbit just immediately begin vying for his attention.
And Anne is forced into a front row seat for all of it.
It's brutal. She has to stand quietly in the corner of these drawing rooms and watch the man she loves actively entertain the idea of a future with someone else.
The psychological torture of observing an ex-partner integrate with new potential mates is intense for anyone.
But for Anne, it's magnified.
It's magnified exponentially by that Zeigarnik effect we discussed earlier. Every single smile Wentworth directs at another woman is a visceral reminder of the exact future Anne sacrificed.
She's literally watching him audition her permanent replacement.
Exactly.
Now here is where I really want to heavily analyze Anne's reaction to all of this, because I think it challenges a lot of modern assumptions about human behavior.
How so?
Well, in almost any other narrative framework, this is the trigger for destructive behavior.
Oh, sure. The jealousy plotline.
Right. The protagonist schemes, she attempts to sabotage the younger women, she becomes incredibly bitter, or she actively tries to insert herself into Wentworth's line of sight to, reclaim her territory.
But Anne does none of this.
None of it. She remains entirely passive. She listens to these women talk about Wentworth, she offers them comfort when they're anxious about him, and she places their well-being way above her own despair.
And the sources generally characterize this as a radical, almost saint-like selflessness.
Right, but wait, let me actually challenge that interpretation.
Go for it.
Is it genuinely radical empathy? Or is it simply a trauma response?
That's an interesting angle.
Because we established earlier that she has spent 8 years being psychologically beaten down and conditioned to view her own desires as invalid.
Yes, she was actively suppressed.
So if you've been trained for a decade to be invisible, stepping aside to let other women pursue the man you love isn't necessarily noble emotional maturity.
You're saying it looks like learned helplessness.
Exactly. It looks a lot like learned helplessness. How can we differentiate between her acting out of profound grace versus her simply defaulting to the role of the doormat that her family forced her into?
That is a brilliant pushback.
Yeah.
Really. And I think the distinction lies in the intentionality of her actions.
Walk me through that.
Well, learned helplessness implies a paralysis, right? A complete withdrawal from agency because the subject genuinely believes their actions have no effect.
Right, you just give up entirely.
But Anne, however, is not paralyzed. She is highly active in her environment, just not in a self-serving way.
She's doing a lot behind the scenes.
Exactly. She actively manages the emotional crises of those around her. When there's an injury or a sudden social disaster within their group, Anne is the one who organizes the response.
She steps up.
She takes total command of the chaos, while the supposedly superior members of her family and social circle just panic or defer responsibility.
They completely fall apart.
They do. So her selflessness is not a retreat. It is a conscious, active deployment of her emotional intelligence to minimize harm to others, even while she herself is actively suffering.
Okay, I see the mechanism there. It's the difference between freezing in the face of pain versus actively managing the pain of the collective.
Precisely.
And the fascinating byproduct of this active empathy is how the society around her begins to slowly recalibrate its perception of her.
They start to wake up.
They really do. The very traits that made her an anomaly and a target for her superficial family life, her quietness, her observation, her refusal to engage in petty social warfare, suddenly become the exact traits that stabilize the group.
They start to rely on her.
Heavily. The invisible sister slowly reveals herself to be the structural, load-bearing pillar of their entire social circle.
And society is not the only entity observing this shift, by the way.
Wentworth is watching.
Wentworth is watching very closely. Despite his attempts to construct that Faraday cage of polite indifference, he is fundamentally an analytical man.
He's taking in the data.
He is. He's watching Anne handle incredibly difficult, highly charged social situations with a grace and a fortitude that completely contradicts the mental model he has built of her over the last 8 years.
Which brings us to the real psychological turning point of the entire narrative. Wentworth's cognitive dissonance.
The friction.
Yeah, because for 8 years, Wentworth had to process the trauma of her rejection. And human beings are incredibly predictable when it comes to processing deep emotional pain caused by another person.
We villainize them.
We absolutely villainize them. We rely heavily on the fundamental attribution error.
Exactly. And for the listener, the fundamental attribution error is our cognitive bias to attribute someone else's actions to their underlying character, while attributing our own actions to situational circumstances.
I messed up because I was tired. You messed up because you're a bad person.
Exactly that. So when Anne broke the engagement, Wentworth's brain protected his fragile ego by deciding, she rejected me because she is weak. She is shallow.
She's just like the rest of her awful family.
She possesses the same toxic vanity as her father and sister. She lacks loyalty. He attributed the breakup entirely to a fatal flaw in her character.
But now, he is in the same physical space as her.
Day in and day out.
Right. And he is watching her act with radical empathy. He watches her care for others. He sees the absolute emotional maturity with which she handles his own coldness toward her.
It doesn't add up for him.
Not at all. The data his eyes are taking in directly conflicts with the villain narrative his brain constructed to survive the heartbreak.
And that contradiction creates an unbearable psychological friction.
Because the weak, shallow woman who supposedly betrayed him for social standing simply does not exist.
But the deeply compassionate, resilient woman standing right in front of him definitely does.
And resolving that cognitive dissonance forces Wentworth to completely reframe the original rejection.
He has to.
If Anne is not fundamentally weak or shallow, then why did she leave him?
He's forced to abandon the fundamental attribution error.
Yes, and he finally has to examine the situational constraints she was actually under.
He begins to comprehend the crushing, inescapable pressure of a toxic family dynamic.
The entailment, the threat of destitution.
All of it. He recognizes the terror of a society where a woman's entire survival is dictated by the economic approval of her male relatives.
It's a massive paradigm shift in his empathy. He stops looking at the event of 8 years ago as something that was done to him and starts looking at it as an agonizing trial that Anne was forced through.
That's a great way to put it.
He realizes she wasn't a traitor. She was a casualty of her environment. Her agency was systematically dismantled by the people who were supposed to protect her.
And once you recognize that the person who hurt you was acting under immense duress and coercion, the foundation of your resentment just crumbles.
You can't stay mad.
You can't.
Yeah.
You cannot maintain a defensive posture of punitive coldness against someone you suddenly view with profound empathy.
The Faraday cage begins to power down.
Exactly, the walls come down.
But dismantling a defense mechanism doesn't just instantly solve the problem.
Oh no, it's never that easy.
Right, because they are still trapped in the incredibly rigid social protocols of early 19th century polite society.
You can't just send a text saying, hey, I get it now, let's talk.
No. The mechanics of their reconciliation have to operate through these incredibly microscopic avenues.
A dropped word in a conversation.
Yeah, or the tone of a briefly exchanged letter. The subtle repositioning of themselves in a crowded room.
The stakes during this phase of the narrative are astronomically high. Every interaction is basically a calculation in game theory.
They're testing the waters.
They are attempting to communicate profound, life-altering vulnerabilities without the safety net of direct speech.
Because if Wentworth signals his renewed affection, and he has misread Anne's passive endurance as lingering love-like, if she has actually moved on, his pride will be permanently, irrevocably destroyed.
He will have exposed his neck a second time, only to be struck down.
And conversely, if Anne breaks protocol and reveals that she never stopped loving him, and Wentworth is merely acting out of renewed politeness rather than romantic intent,
she faces absolute social and emotional annihilation.
they are both carrying the agonizing knowledge of what they lost, walking a tightrope of social convention, and desperately trying to read each other's micro-expressions to determine if it is safe to jump.
It is an excruciatingly slow burn, and it pushes both characters to the absolute limit of their endurance, forcing a final confrontation where the past and the future just collide head-on.
They've reached the climax.
Where the core question must be answered. Will the trauma and mistakes of their history dictate the trajectory of the rest of their lives?
So let's dissect how this resolves, particularly focusing on Anne, because her evolution is really the thematic core of the entire text.
Absolutely.
It is very easy to read the ending of a romance as simply, the couple gets together and the conflict ends.
Oh, here. That's the surface level reading.
But that entirely misses the point. Anne's ultimate triumph is not securing the wealthy captain.
No, it's not.
Her climax is a profound act of individuation.
Individuation, yes. And for you listening, individuation in Jungian psychology is the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious to achieve a fully realized self.
A self that is separate from the collective mass.
Exactly. For Anne, the collective mass was the suffocating, highly transactional hive mind of her family and her social class.
And 8 years ago, she allowed that collective to override her individual judgment.
She did. But the woman who finally communicates her enduring love to Wentworth is not the terrified, eroded girl from 8 years ago.
Not at all.
She has endured nearly a decade of the hollow reality that comes from obeying bad advice.
And when she finally steps forward, she is making a radical declaration of self-trust.
It's beautiful.
It is. She is looking at the societal expectations, she's looking at the lingering disapproval of her family, and deciding that her own internal compass is the only navigational tool she will ever trust again.
She reclaims her agency. She flat out refuses to allow external persuasion to orchestrate her existence for a second time.
And Wentworth meets her at this exact level of vulnerability.
He has to.
He drops the armor of his pride. He acknowledges that his success, his wealth, and his status were essentially meaningless distractions from the fact that his core affection for her remained entirely untouched by time.
They both actively choose vulnerability over the safety of their defense mechanisms.
They choose honesty over the protection of pride.
And when you pull all the way back from the mechanics of the plot, you see the brilliant architectural design of this narrative.
It's so well constructed.
It is. Yes, it functions flawlessly as a story of enduring love, but underneath that, it is a stark, almost brutal cautionary tale.
It is a warning about the physics of outsourced choices.
Ooh, the physics of outsourced choices. I like that.
Think about it. If you allow the noise of your environment, the expectations of your family, the superficial metrics of your society, the terrible advice of people who do not truly understand your core values, to persuade you out of your own convictions, you alone will bear the cost.
That's the tragic truth of it.
The people who gave Anne the advice to drop Wentworth didn't suffer during those 8 years.
No, they went right on with their shallow lives.
Anne bore the entirety of the psychological toll.
It really demands that you, the listener, examine your own life. Where are you letting the collective override your individual intuition?
Where are you letting the fear of societal disapproval force you into a state of lingering regret?
Because the reunion of Anne and Wentworth is only possible because they did the agonizing internal work to strip away those external pressures.
Wentworth had to dismantle the ego that demanded he hold on to his resentment.
And Anne had to dismantle the conditioning that demanded she submit to authority.
They had to become the architects of their own emotional reality rather than the victims of it.
What a phenomenal breakdown. We've taken a narrative that is often dismissed as a simple period piece and exposed the intricate psychological machinery operating right beneath the surface.
We've explored how a forcefully severed connection loops endlessly in the brain.
How cognitive dissonance forces us to reevaluate our chosen villains.
And how the ultimate act of rebellion is simply trusting your own judgment.
But before we conclude, I really want to introduce a final framework for you, the listener, to process.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because we have spent this entire discussion treating the 8-year separation as a tragedy.
Right.
We have mourned the time Anne Wentworth lost to the toxic persuasion of her family and the stubborn pride of his youth. But I challenge you to look at those 8 years not as a void, but as a crucible.
A necessary fire.
Precisely. Consider the Wentworths of 8 years ago. He was passionate, yes, but he was also untested, volatile, and perhaps reliant on the validation of the upper classes he secretly resented.
He hadn't proven himself yet.
Exactly. The agonizing rejection he suffered at Anne's hands was the precise catalyst that drove him to the sea.
It fueled him.
It fueled the relentless ambition that resulted in his wealth, his command, and his unshakable self-reliance. Without that specific trauma, does he ever become the formidable Captain Wentworth?
That is a great point. And, take that a step further for Anne.
Yeah.
If she had simply married him at 19, defying her family but still operating under the mental framework of an obedient, quiet girl, would she have ever developed her own psychological spine?
Probably not.
The 8 years of living with the horrific consequences of outsourcing her intuition forced her to study her own mind.
It forced her to observe the absolute moral bankruptcy of her family's worldview from the inside out.
Exactly. The isolation she endured was the exact environment required to harden her empathy into an active, resilient force, rather than just a passive trait.
It raises a terrifying but beautiful question.
What if the original failure wasn't a mistake that ruined their timeline?
Perhaps they were fundamentally unready for each other at 19. The tragedy of their separation may have been the exact developmental requirement for them to individuate, to shed the burdens of their respective backgrounds, and to finally become the actualized adults capable of sustaining a genuine partnership.
The detour, however painful, was the only viable route to the destination.
Exactly.
That reframes the entire concept of regret. What if the mistake you are currently agonizing over was just the mandatory tuition you had to pay to become the person you are right now?
That is an incredible thought to carry with you.
It really is. Thank you for joining us today on this exploration. We hope this deep dive into persuasion has provided you with a new lens through which to examine the forces of expectation in your own life, the defense mechanisms you employ, and the vital, terrifying courage it takes to finally listen to your own voice. Take care of yourselves.